Jerry, do you want to open us? Are you sure? Dram Rira Lingshi Ninde Kimpadi Sange Shindu Nite Uwagi Trokum Namda Shingla Dupasho Yiram Guru Mandala Kamira Tayami Chudang Soki Choknam La Changchu Vardu Daknim Gapsuchi Daki Tunyang Kimpe Sunam Ki Panchir Sange Drupasho Chudang Soki Choknam La Changchu Vardu Dakni Gapsuchi Daki Jinyang Kimbe Kunamki Drola Panchir Sanke Drupasho Chudang Soki Choknam La Dangchu Vardu Dakni Gapsuchi Daki Jinyang Kimbe Sunaki Drola Panchir Sanke Sho. Okay, so we're gonna start with a 5-minute sit, and the 5 minutes I'll lead it in the very beginning just to get you started, but you're basically going to spend 5 minutes relaxing. So we've called it settling your body, speech, and mind, which means that you're basically going to use your breath to just start to relax fully. Okay. When they say settle your body, speech, and mind, it means that you're looking to settle it in its most natural state when there hasn't been something pushing it or pulling it. It's just where it would naturally settle, okay, without all the other noise that comes in, right? So that's what we're going to do for the first 5 minutes. Most of you will find that there will be a lot of noise, which is good to be able to see. And your goal is to just see if you can use your breath to release and relax yourself. That's it, okay? Then we'll stretch for a minute right in between, and then we'll do a 9-minute sit. And today what we're going to do is we're going to be doing a sit that is a meditation that's called the merging of mind and space. It's a very, at least from my understanding and what I've seen, a very pretty much a standard traditional kind of shamatha type of meditation. And what you'll be doing I'll walk you through it a little bit in the beginning, but I'm going to really give you at least half of the time, if not a little bit longer, to see how it goes for you. And what you'll be doing for the most part will be observing your mind from a very objective place. So the goal is to be able to watch your mind completely, see what rises, what comes up. Don't push it away, but also don't grasp at it. Don't attach yourself to the ideas. And your only objective is to watch it like a movie almost. Metaphors that I've heard in the past is like watching the clouds go by, you know, or I don't know. For me, it's always been like a bus stop. I don't know why. That's probably because I'm just in the city, but I always imagine like sitting at the, because for those of you who know, I don't like to walk. I ride the bus a lot. So it's like sitting at the bus stop and watching the buses kind of go by. I've also heard it in terms of waves. So the objective is to be able to sit, see if you can watch your thoughts rise, and then in its own way dissipate without being attached to it. Okay? Does that make sense? Does that make sense to everyone? Kind of? Okay. Sort of. Um, the point of it, just so that you understand, so you're not sitting there being like, why am I doing this? What's the point? The point of it is to start to get a better understanding of how much most of us are subject to the thoughts in our minds, right? Most of us have thoughts that come up, and then it feels really urgent to address it immediately and pay attention to it, whether it be um, um, an affliction that arises, whether it's being impatient or upset or frustrated or saying something before you even think, right? Or even just an emotion that arises, right? So what this starts to do and starts to what this practice starts to become for you is the ability to take a step back, understand that those thoughts exist, those emotions do exist, but realizing that you don't have to be a victim to those ideas all the time. Does that make sense? So that when you do this on the cushion and then you start to see how it gets into your mind stream, you actually can start to practice it off the cushion as well. So when a text comes up, you don't feel immediately that you need to go look at it. When someone says something like your boss or your coworker, you're not going to feel like you need to be reactive to it immediately. And it allows you to start practicing with controlling or being in control of the space of your mind. Okay? Does that make sense? Any questions before we start? Now's a good time to ask. No? Okay. All right. Here we go. Get comfy. 5 minutes to start to relax, and 9 minutes afterwards doing a merging of mind and space. Okay. Okay. Start to relax, knowing that this is your last full session of meditation this evening, for the most of you at least. Start breathing and inhaling and exhaling out through your nose, relaxing your body fully. Relax your face completely, all muscles, your eyebrows, your jaw, the corners of your lips. Let gravity do its thing and fully relax your body. Using every exhale to release any tension that you find. Start to relax the speech, the ongoing noise that usually occupies the space of your mind, the chit chat, the commentaries, the criticisms, Start to release all that noise that occupies your mind through every exhale. Not pushing it or forcing it, just simply releasing. Just letting the air out. Now start to relax the mind, the ideas, the worries, thoughts, images. Begin to use your breath to let it go, so that you begin to fully settle in its most natural state, the body, the speech, and the mind. Okay, nice. How was that? It was difficult? Yeah. Okay. A lot of noise? Or you're falling asleep? No, tired. You're sleepy? Yeah. Okay. Anyone else? I can't see you. Can't see your pretty face. Anyone else? Lots of speech. Anyone else? Did you get it? Were you like, I don't get it? Everyone get.
I find ever since you mentioned think of yourself relaxing in like a
Jacuzzi or something?
jacuzzi,
Yeah.
right? I picture myself in places
Oh, to fully, physically.
That's helpful.
Mm.
I guess my mind is not relaxed if I'm having a visualization going.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay.
But it makes me feel relaxed.
Yeah. Another way you can do this part again when you're at home is, and I do encourage it just so you can see, but lying down and doing a shavasana for 5 minutes and then getting back up. Because if it's hard for you to lie down and you end up dozing, if that's difficult, then lie down for 5 minutes, see what happens. So physically you can see what it's like, so that when you do your next sit, you're sitting up and you get a sense of how much more subtle tension there is in your body. That also helps me as well, because just that relaxation pose, right, when you're fully relaxed lying down, is also helpful. Yeah. Okay. How is that for you? It's okay. Yeah. Okay, good. All right, so now you guys know what you're kind of dealing with, kind of meat you have. And the next, okay, so now we're going to go into merging mind and space. We'll start off exactly the same way. I'll lead you through it. And I'll lead you for a few minutes into it, and then I'm going to let you ride and see what happens. Okay. So the hardest thing that people always say with this meditation until you get used to it is you get kidnapped by your thoughts or by the noise. So that usually you think like, oh, I'm doing good, I'm relaxing, I'm seeing my thoughts. And then somewhere something hooks. And then before you know it, it's like ding. And you've just been like on this whole story and journey of something that you've been thinking about. So try to, as much as possible, watch your mind as if it's like a projector on a screen and understanding that it's a projector. Does that make sense? Okay. That makes sense. You're almost, you're not and you're not critiquing it and you're not evaluating it. There's no criticism. There's no good or bad or judgment. There's no identifying with it necessarily. You're not looking at it and saying that's so, and you don't do that. You just watch it. It's like um, watching anything that you see. It's like, you know, you see, how many times do you go outside and you just see things passing, right? People walking and passing and you don't identify, that's a man, that's a girl, he has blonde hair, she has, you know, blue eyes. You don't necessarily do that. You just let it kind of have its own journey. So that's what you're going to be doing. So the focus specifically is to be able to just see if you can observe the space of your mind, let your thoughts come and go, and just let it be without trying to be a part of it or changing it. You can use your breath to help release it, but you're not pushing it. There's no forcing it out. Does that make sense? You're not, it's not a pushing out like that. It's just like we talked about last week, where it's like waves that come in and out. Okay. Because when you try to force things, right, what usually happens? There's usually resistance that comes back. So it will come back stronger and bigger. So just take it easy and see if you can just watch and observe and see what happens. And the thoughts usually sort of kind of die when you don't entertain it. It's interesting, where they get bored. It's like these little, it's like cockroaches, is what a teacher used to say to me, you know? It's like, um, you know, they come out when you when they know they're hiding from you, right? So they do this thing, but then at some point, have you ever met cockroaches or even mice that start to get accustomed to people? And they're like, whatever, you know. They just, so it starts to become a little bit like that. So you just have to watch and see um, how your thoughts behave, you know. And the more you pay attention to it and you say, okay, let's take a look, let's really take a look. It's interesting because they usually kind of scurry away. They'll kind of not be interested suddenly. Okay, but don't engage in it. That's not the point. All right. Okay, let's see how this goes. 9 minutes. Here we go. Start to relax fully, settling your body in its most natural state. Settle your breath so it's in its natural flow. And start to bring your attention to the core of your mind. Bring your awareness to the space of your mind. Let your awareness be undistracted by desires or hopes and fears of grasping. See if you can feel your awareness be naturally still and bright. And then bring your awareness, bring its attention to the space of your mind and begin to notice what appearances start to come along. Are there images, thoughts arising? And if so, let them pass. Let them pass in the space of your awareness without trying to modify it, reify it, without grasping onto them as mine. Just let those thoughts be. Make sure you continue breathing. Let your awareness be completely still in the midst of all the movement that may be taking place in the space of your mind. Let your awareness be still, but also completely relaxed and loose, free of grasping, so that none of these thoughts that come up pull at you or draw you away. Whatever comes up, let it come and rise, and then simply release them using your breath. Continue resting here, letting your awareness dwell unimpeded. And whatever activities of the mind come up, just release them right back into space. What'd you think?
I have a question.
Yeah, please.
I think what I didn't quite understand is that, or I wasn't clear until I started to try to do it. Am I still using my breath as an anchor?
Um,
Like, what am I aiming to focus on?
you're focusing on the space of your mind. You're using your breath as a, it's not an anchor. You're using your breath because your breath isn't your focus. You're using your breath um, as a supportive tool to help with releasing thoughts that happen. So that at some point your breath almost facilitates the release of thoughts. It kind of rides in a similar wave to the thoughts that come up and down.
But I think I don't understand the space of my mind.
Hmm. You don't understand what it is.
Yes,
Do you know that you have, do you don't know where it is, you mean?
yes.
Hmm.
And like for me, I mean, number one, I use my breath as my object.
Hmm.
Like I've been using that for years, and
Hmm.
so it's like it's just a habit. Like as soon as I close my eyes, that's where my brain goes to.
Hmm.
But I would get like I was like a little bit lost because I am obviously like thinking all the thoughts, but I think I felt like unless I had something, it's like I wanted to put my hand out on the wall with my breath
Hmm.
to be like, oh, just to give myself some perspective so that then when the thoughts did come up, I could look at them because otherwise it it's a lot and I didn't know. Like it felt like me. It feels like when you're spinning, kind of you everything around you is moving so you can't like be still, and I just
Uh,
needed to orient myself
yeah,
so
yeah,
that I could be like,
yeah,
you're thinking about a snack,
yeah. Okay.
you know.
So the thing that you keep that's completely focused and still is your awareness. It's not your breath, it's your awareness that needs to be still. Your breath isn't what's anchoring it, it's your awareness that anchors it. And the awareness is the clarity of being able to have attention. It's your attention. So, like the example that I would give is you have if I say, sorry, what's this? And you're looking at it and you're completely aware that it's a cup.
Yeah.
Can you also see that it's a cup and think about palm trees on a beach at the same time?
Absolutely.
Totally, right? Your awareness is here, but your mind also has other thoughts going off, but your awareness isn't necessarily there. So it's the same thing. Like I could be sitting and thinking breath, 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 but a lot of the times while I'm thinking breath, there's also a lot of other stuff that's going around the periphery, right? So what you're doing is you're trying to create your, it's hard because I can't create a visual because it's not a visual, right? But what you're trying to do is you're trying to understand what is my awareness? How do I have a sharp attention to my awareness in the space of the mind? Meaning the space of the mind isn't really anywhere, but there is something where your mind has a place where it occupies somewhere that you've created where thoughts come out of it and you can watch it. I mean, I can sit here, I can look right at a camera, but at the same time know that there's all these things going on in the space of my mind. So your breath isn't really there to anchor you so much. Your awareness, your attention is what stays steadfast. And it's watching all these things that are coming up. Your breath is there really as a tool to keep you relaxed. Because sometimes what happens, at least for me, is I'll start and I'm completely, but as I get more serious about being attentively aware of what's going on and being like watching objectively, I'll get tense. It will become, and it's sometimes subtle and other times very obvious. Like my body starts to tense up and I lean forward and I will have a brow. I mean, and I see it in all of you too. Like there are moments where it's like, you know, so the breath is really there as a tool to keep you fully relaxed. It's just a body experience that your mind should be doing as well. It's not what necessarily anchors you. I mean, it supports you being fully, because the point is that you can't reach shamatha, you can't really meditate at all when you're tense. Meditation is a complete, it's, you can't have realizations by being tense. It does not work that way. You have to be attentive, but completely relax at the same time. So it's starting to practice, can you have sharp attention, but use your breath as a tool to completely relax? Watching, it is a bit of it is, I mean, I won't say multitasking, but there are multiple things happening. Does that make sense?
I can understand the concept. Like,
Yeah.
I can intellectualize it, but I think, like, so for me, like, two things. Number one is just like, in general, I struggle with relaxation, and like,
Mhm.
it's not like I literally, like, I just came from yoga. My body is calm and relaxed, and that's fine. But my, like,
Mhm.
mental narrative is that any time that I think I'm not doing something perfectly, I get tense.
Yeah.
And so a lot of my meditation time
Right.
is spent like just like practicing accepting that and not letting that stress me out, because that, do you
Yeah,
understand what I'm
sure,
saying?
sure.
And the other thing is, like, I could tell in this meditation that I I was aware that I am not being aware. Does that make sense?
Totally.
And so then it's hard, like,
Yeah.
like when you're in that place where you're just like trying to build this awareness, I don't understand how, like, sometimes the cup just doesn't get right.
Sure. Okay, so there's two things. The first thing is you have to practice this more often and you will see how it will change. Secondly, when you have that narrative that comes up to you and says and speaks to you about perfection, right? That's you grasping onto a thought. And the thing that is the most difficult about this meditation in particular is that um, there is no room, and it's not even correct if you have moments of um, gauging whether it's perfect or not. When you have a thought of like, what are you doing? Are you even doing this right? That's a mental, that's a thought that's arising in the space of your mind, right? It's noise, whether it's speech or mind, right? And so when that comes up, it's not about keeping that voice there while you're still doing everything else. It's about releasing that as well. It's a place where there is no criticism, there's no judgment, there is no subjective anything. It's just completely objective. It's not this or that, it just is. So when there are things that come up and it's confusing and you're having these moments of, is it this or is it that? Am I doing it right? And all that stuff coming in, that is just another way of your mind messing with you. So it's saying, we're not going to talk about laundry. That's too obvious for you, right? We're not going to talk about what I need to do tomorrow or my list of chores or whether I like my boyfriend or not or whatever that may be. But what it might do to you and mess with you even more is it will start to have these levels of criticism. So it's not an image, but it's noise. And when you engage with that, you've just got caught again. And that's how you've gotten your kidnap. So you just identify probably for yourself your biggest kidnapper and what kind of form it takes. Mine is usually, mine is always, not always, but it's usually very much the same things. It's number one, work, and number two, my mother. Like those are my kidnappers. And I'm like, damn it, and I know when it happens. The work thing I've gotten better with. And then my mom will just come up even stronger. And she doesn't, it's not her, it's something that she did or something that happened or like something she said at Thanksgiving. And I'm like, what the hell? Why would you say something like, and it becomes that. That's how I get hooked. So we all have our individual type of kidnappers that are our trigger points. The point is, can you let it come up and then release it? You're not saying it doesn't exist. It completely exists for you, but you're just saying you're not going to engage with that thought, with those ideas, with that concept, the things that you think, anything like that. It's not like that. And so it becomes that type of meditation where are you able to sit back and just watch the blah 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 happen and not attach to it or reify it or say it is this or it is my idea. It is no idea. It is an idea and a construct that you've created for yourself for whatever reason. It doesn't really exist any more than you've made it exist. It isn't anything more than your ideas that because that that noise only exists for you, right? That's not the same noise that I have. It's not self-existent. So the challenge is letting it pass and letting it go. This is by far my go-to favorite meditation every day. I cannot even tell you guys enough. You do this every day for, I swear to you, do it for 2 weeks, do it for 14 days and see what happens. It is mind-boggling to me. It is one of the best practices that I've ever received from a teacher. And it continues to be my go-to because what it does is it starts to make me understand what's that noise that I have, but it doesn't occupy me always when I'm on the cushion. It's the thing that traps me my day to day all the time. It's the thing that drives what I decide to do all the time. It's the thing that I realize is what dictates how I dress every morning, what kinds of friends I decide to have, where I decide to eat, how I decide to decorate my bedroom. I mean, what decisions and career or life decisions I make. There's all this weird noise that have completely influenced the way I think all the time. And I've made that and identified that as G. Those are G's beliefs and philosophies and ideas, right? But what this meditation has allowed me to do is take a look at it and watch it objectively and be like, is it mine? And when did it become mine? And whose was it? And how did I decide that it was actually real? So it's a very amazing and wonderful practice. So what I'd like for all of us to do is between now and the end of this course, so today's class 9, we have 10, we have a review and final, so we have 3 more weeks left, is to do this practice and see what happens, because it's one of the most, I don't know, for me, like the most interesting practice, because it allows me to have space to think about, or I wouldn't even say think about, but to watch relevant information in situations and real life things that happen to me every day. I'm not doing a visualization about somebody else. I'm not trying to visualize the Buddha. I'm not trying to do a tonglen or think about healing. So and sometimes I don't, and sometimes those topics are important, but this to me is like the most real life, pertains to my daily life on the cushion and off the cushion every day. So I would try it and see what happens and see if you're able to, because the minute you're like, I need to ground myself, you've reified your breath, right? You've made your breath an actual thing. It isn't, right? So there isn't like a solid, like when you said, I want to feel the wall to, you're trying to grasp on something, like I need something real to hang on to while I let the rest of my mind or my body float away. It's not like that. There is nothing real like that.
It's just so vast.
It's so vast. Yeah. It can feel a bit scary at times, or just like ungrounding, or like, oh, like you're in a like a tornado, you know. But the point is that you end up being like the eye of the tornado, and you become, it's you become completely centered. Your awareness is completely grounded, and it is so still that all this noise around it, it wouldn't even flicker a light of candle. It just wouldn't. So it doesn't mean that everything else around you needs to be still. That's not always going to be the case, right? I mean, when you have afflictions, that's not the case at all. So the question is, can you have clarity and awareness and stillness and keep your mind focused and knowing that there is a brightness to your awareness in the midst of all of that chaos that's happening in the space of your mind? And where is that space? I mean, that's what we did last week. It's not anywhere. It's a construct that we have, right? But there is still yet all these thoughts that come up. So can you observe it and watch it and learn to be unattached to any of that noise that comes up? You know, any attachment that happens. My big thing also is, you know, worrying about the future. You know, it's always that, like, worrying about the future, and I don't really go into the past as much as I spend time in the future. Sometimes past, when I'm resentful, like the past stuff comes up. I can't believe they did this, you know, like that kind of stuff comes up. But my other thing is I tend to like go into the future and get wrapped up in that. So just take a look and see what is your thing. Does that make sense? Okay. All right, cool. Any other questions before we move on? If you have questions while you do this week, we'll practice again next week. Please feel free to email me about it, or we can meet and talk about it. It's a really simple and very basic practice, but incredibly important to a meditator, any meditator. You can't, and we've talked about this, it's not possible to reach any type of realization if you don't have stillness. And that's what shamatha is. It is the basic, okay? And it's not to just keep you calm and relaxed, which it will do, but what it will do is that it will train your mind to know how to be in control of itself. So most of the times when we I wouldn't say misbehave, but the reason that we have so much suffering in our life is because we've created the causes to have suffering, right? Which means that every time you experience some sort of suffering in your life, whether it's anything, you name it, fear, loneliness, anxiety, instability, um, um, being heartbroken, any of those things that you have, all the different sufferings that you can imagine, physical and mental and emotional, all those things are because you've had the causes for them. Because at some point in your past, what we say in Buddhism is that because of the way karma works, we'll talk about it a little bit more today, is that you've planted that seed in the past. And those seeds happen because you've succumbed to some sort of act that you did that was not virtuous. And most likely that happened too because you don't have a control of your mind, right? Your mind just has these things that it wants to do and you have no control over it. And so you say things or do things or act out on things or behave a certain way or think thoughts that really, if you really had an understanding of how to get a handle on your mind, it just wouldn't do. Like, how many times have you had moments where you're like, that was just not my best self. I did not behave the best way I possibly can. It's like something overcame me and I became possessed and I just lost my shit. How many times have that happened to you? Right? You know, something where you just didn't, or you just shut down, or something happened where you just weren't your highest self. And that happens because your mind controls you. Now, when you have complete awareness and clarity, you won't have that. You understand how to dictate that and what that means. And it's not like you're just at the mercy of whatever your mind and your emotions want to be, right? So that's what this practice does. You know, you do it consistently, do it 9 minutes every day, sit, find the same time, and start to take a look and see And you will start to notice, I assure you, that when you're off the cushion, how you'll start to see different ideas or things tug at you. And you'll decide one day, suddenly, you'll say, think to yourself, I'm not going to, I'm just not going to participate with that right now. And it's with no judgment. It's not like I'm too good for that, or I don't want to deal with that, or it's not like that. It's just not now, later, not now. You know, it's very neutral. It's not pushing it away. It's not shutting it off or cutting it off. It's just, I'm not doing it right now. And it gives you that ability to have that kind of awareness where you can see what tugs at you, what you can see kind of pushes your buttons. Okay? Does that make sense? Give it a go. We'll see how it goes this week. All right. Okay. Here we go. Class 9. So, I hope all of you had a nice Thanksgiving, first of all. Was it okay? Kind of. I've been thinking about Thanksgiving a lot this past week, and for my Thanksgiving, Armando and I had family over. We hosted Thanksgiving for both our families. And I've been thinking a lot about what gratitude means and how to show gratitude. And something that the scriptures will talk about today was that, and that I've been just thinking about over the last few weeks, is that the best way to show gratitude is to take what you've learned, right, from whoever has taught you something, or the moment you have that feeling of gratitude, to take that moment of what it is that you've learned, or what it is that you've gained, or what it is that you're appreciating, and then to do something with it, right? I think that's kind of fair to say. Like, it doesn't make sense to me when I hear people who talk about how they had this amazing moment where they see the sunset or the sunrise happen, or they climbed a mountain and they saw this like a magical, a miraculous moment of just the greatness of Mother Earth, right? And then they come home and they don't recycle, they pollute, there's no awareness of what they're doing to the environment. What's the point, right? To have a moment of gratitude and appreciation if you don't take that learning, right? And so, like, for Thanksgiving, I had my family, before we dived into our meal, write one way, something that they have gratitude for, but also what they're going to do with it and how they're going to give, right? What do you give with what you know and learn? And so, something we'll talk about tonight is the best way for any of you to be able to have appreciation of what you learn in these classes is really to be able to do something with it. So, because there is really no point for you to sit in the classes and then go out to, tonight or tomorrow and just not apply anything of what you've learned. There's something in the scriptures that talks specifically about how you can actually become hardened, or I guess another way to think of it is jaded with the Dharma. The first time you hear it, the first time you have these moments where you hear something and you're like, wow, that was so amazing, or that was so interesting, or I totally get it and it resonates, you'll never have that experience again. You'll hear it again and again and again. And sometimes it takes hundreds of times of hearing the same thing, and then one day it'll click for you. But while it's ripe, while it's fresh and the information is fresh to you, take that and do something with it. And so tonight we'll talk about how Jason Kappa talks about how he urges all of us to really consider what we're going to do with the teachings that you have. What does that mean? At last week we talked about what about teachers. Tonight we're going to talk about after you take a teacher, what do you do with that? What does that even look like? And taking a teacher for you can be all different ways. It can be something that's simply in your heart. It can be something that you do formally where you ask someone to be a certain kind of teacher for you. But we'll go into that a little bit more, okay? The other thing too is that as you start to practice more, and if you are practicing more, you should notice that you become a person most people want to be around more, okay? If you are feeling like you're practicing and you're not, most people are wanting to like run away from you or they don't like you and you're starting to see that, just check in and see if you're really practicing properly. The teachers that you have, that you look at, should have that kind of quality where you want to be around them. You know, you like them. There's something about them that moves you, that inspires you, that makes you want to be a better person. And as you progress in your practice, that's a quality that you should also be seeing for yourself. You know, you should see that people are being intrigued by you and want to be close to you and befriend you. Okay. And that's how you also know another way of whether or not your practice is evolving. Okay. All right. Last week we talked about the 4 great divisions. And these were the 4 things we talked about, right? We talked about the root of the path, how to practice and purify the mind after taking a lama, requests for help in the practice, and a prayer to meet lamas and to achieve goals. So we're going to focus on the second one tonight. Can you say Ningpo, Lenpar, Kulwa? Again, Ningpo, Lempar, Kulwa. So Ningpo is essence, Lenpar is to get to or take to, and Kulwa is to urge. So after you've taken a teacher, your teacher or any teachers that you have should most likely urge you to start taking essence, which basically means learning to take the essence of your life. It means to not waste your life. Okay. So this statement here is, Tsongkhapa is really talking about how do you get the meaning of your life? How do you do that? You know? And so the first, he's going to go into 2 parts. The first part is his sense of urgency. Please understand the value you have of your life. Please understand that you only have this one life in this body. It's very rare. We'll go into that a little bit more. And there's a sense of this great urgency of what it is that you need to be doing with it. How do you make it the most meaningful, right? What do you do to do that? I'm not going to go too deep into it because it can get a little depressing, but I'm going to read. For those of you who are doing readings, great. For those of you who are not, I would take a look at reading 9. It's a really nice and a lovely reading, actually. Okay, there's a part in the scripture that I'm going to read to you that you'll hear at least maybe a few times during your Dharma career. Here we go. There's yet a third way to show how difficult it is to find a life so opportune as your own. This involves using a metaphor, such as a following from the letter to a friend. Suppose a turtle in the sea were to rise and poke his head right through the hole of a wooden ring as if it drifted around the surface of the great salt sea. The odds of being born a human, as opposed to birth as an animal, are even more remote. Make it come, Lord of men, by living holy Dharma. So the analogy basically is imagine there's a sea turtle in the ocean, okay, which is massive, and it decides one day to poke its head outside or above the water, and the chances of the turtle being able to lift up from the water right into the middle of one of those circular donuts, you know, that float, the little life, what is it? Life preservers? Is that something? I don't think it's a life preserver, but you know, the round little donuts. The chances of a turtle rising above the sea level and having its head poke right through a circular life preserver is is the is the same chance for you to become a human born as a human. I mean, that's what they're saying. So Tsongkhapa goes into, really understanding how important it is to realize that you're burning through a tremendous amount of good karma that you've created to be born a human being. It's not something to take lightly. The chances of you becoming a human being again is possible. It just might take at some point it'll take an infinite amount of lifetimes to get back here again. Being born a human is the only kind of form where you can be enlightened in one lifetime. And so his sense of talking about this is really to give you a sense of urgency, to understand that you really do have only one life. Well, you have one human life that's very rare, and to understand that. And you have the capacity to be able to do so much with it. So his urgency is to understand what it is that you're doing here, do something that's meaningful of it, and to take that one life seriously. Okay. Now, the way he goes into it is a list of 8 ways of lacking opportunity. Basically, it's going to be 8 things, 8 situations where there are lousy situations that you could have found yourself in, but you didn't. Okay. And this is his way of going through and talking about how rare your life situation is right now. The first one is wrong view. I'll go back one. Is wrong view. This one, really, the idea here is that you don't live in a world where there's a tremendous amount of wrong view. There is the worst kind of wrong view that they would say in the scriptures is denying karma. But if you take a look at this world, it's interesting, and that it's not that the whole world that you live in subscribes to the ideas of karma, but there is something inherently interesting about how people think about morality, for instance, right? Like, historically, it's been something in this country in particular that we live in, right? Where we know that there are ethics, there's a code of conduct, that we know that inherently lying is not good. It's not a good way of being, right? We know that you can't just kill somebody, or else if we did, we would just, if we have a bad day with a client or with a coworker or a boss, you would just kill them. You'd be like, you suck. I'm over it. I have no patience for you anymore. So why wouldn't you just go out and shoot them in the head? So there is something about the morality that we have. There is a correct view, or I should say, there isn't a terrible wrong view that we live in. You live in a world today where there is some sort of gauge of having a better view. So the idea here is that you don't live in a world with a lot of wrong view. Does that make sense? Okay, there's some sort of moral code that we all live in. The second one is that you weren't born as an animal. And that's a really big deal, especially in the Buddhist scriptures. They talk about being born as an animal as basically it's just the idea of being born in the food chain. Animals, when you look at any animal, I mean, domesticated dogs, for instance, and cats have kind of brought out some of that instinct. But if you even take a look at them, there's always a sense of fear that animals have, right? They're always being concerned that they're going to be eaten all the time, whether it's anything or killed, right? Whether it's anything from a fly or to roaches, up the food chain, right? So the fact that you weren't born an animal, that you weren't born as a craving spirit, meaning you weren't born as a being that is completely succumbed by greed and wanting more and more things, but never feeling satiated or satisfied. I'm not going to go into this too much, but we've talked about kind of hungry ghosts or craving spirits in the past. And the way that hungry ghosts or craving spirits live is that um, they they've collected the karma to never be satiated. So when they see something like food, they crave for it, but once they get close to it, it ends up not being food, so they can never satisfy their hunger or their thirst. You weren't born in the hell realms. There are different kinds of hell realms in the Buddhist tradition. There's cold hell realms, there's hot hell realms. But basically, every hell realm, there's just a tremendous amount of suffering. There's so much suffering that your mind is occupied by nothing but suffering. So you can't even collect virtue. It's very difficult to because you're so succumbed by suffering all the time. Time goes by incredibly slow in the hell realms. So, you're dealing with a constant suffering of pain in your mind stream in a very, very slow moving time. The best way, or I'm going to add to that, the only way to also not be born in the hell realms, according to Buddhist scripture, and to avoid that at all costs, is to take refuge. So one of the three principal paths we talked about, right, was refuge. And what's refuge? Who remembers?
Combination of two things.
What are the two things?
Having some sort of fear.
Yeah.
And then the belief that there's something that can protect you.
Yeah, that's right. So refuge, when you have refuge, it basically eliminates, when you have full refuge, it means that it eliminates the ability to be reborn as in the hell realms. Okay. You're not born in a place where there are no teachings. You are born in a place where you have access to them and they exist in your world. Okay. You're not in a place that's not uncivilized. This specifically speaks to vowed morality. It means that there are people in this world that are committed to vows. They're not just saying they're going to do something, but they vowed to not do things or to live a certain way with morals. You have all your faculties intact. Right? You're not handicapped physically or mentally anyway. You can completely understand the teachings. You're not born as a pleasure being, which means one of the types of beings that have been born to have the karma to live a totally blissful life, an amazingly blissful life. But once they're run out of that karma, where do they go?
The hell realm.
Directly, right, exactly, directly to the hell realms, because they haven't had the ability to create the causes for more virtue in their life. Ooh, that's it. Those are the 10. Or no, 8. Sorry. Those are the 8. So I'm going to read another little paragraph from the readings that Tsongkhapa says in his commentary. He says, so you and I are free of the 8 ways in which a person can lack spiritual opportunity, and yet we fail to work here now, in the days when we do not have a dharma to practice. We find ourselves locked in the handcuffs of the present life. We throw ourselves into all sorts of meaningless activities aimed at gaining material things or other people's approval or a taste of fame. We want to fit into the world's way of life and so on. These make us so busy. These make us so busy that it's almost as if we have taken special care to invent a 9th way of lacking spiritual opportunity. And then he continues and says, we have here a wonderful life and a body of exactly the same kind that holy persons in the past have used to achieve enlightenment itself. We, though, use these things as a big pot in which to stock up our bad deeds. We have turned our spiritual leisure and fortune into a rich opportunity to suffer. Okay, so we're going to go into 10 fortunes. Are there any questions anyone has?
Yes.
Hmm.
How does someone then get born a human for the first time?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the fact is that all of you have in your past lives collectively have created a tremendous amount of positive karma to be born a human. And so basically when you die, right, at the time of your death, it's basically that you just don't have any more karmas left to stay a human being. You've ran out of your karmas to stay human. And then at that point, that's why you pass. That's why you die. Um, so to be born a human, I mean, every person's different, but what they're basically saying is that you've lived a bazillion lifetimes to be able to get to this point. You've collected, you're cashing out every day that, or every moment really, that you are alive and you're breathing as a human with all the 8 things that you do have, right? And we're going to talk about the 10 fortunes and leisures that we all have. Um, you're basically cashing out on your positive karma. So the importance of why having things like bodhicitta in your heart, right? To be thinking about all beings, how important that is for you. Why it's important to think about morality and virtues and consider other people than yourselves. That's why it's so important. All those actions, all the ways that you think for other people is what starts to create positive karmas for you in the future. Yeah. Okay. Does that make sense? Anything else? Any other questions? Okay. And we're going to go through the 10 fortunes and then we'll take a break. First one, your fortune, right? Your leisure. He calls it the 10 leisures and fortunes. You're born as a human. It's amazing. Doesn't always feel amazing, but it is. You're born in a civilized land, meaning you're born somewhere where someone is there are people keeping and bowing to morality. All your faculties are intact, right? You can think clearly, see, hear, listen.
So civilized land relates directly to morality.
Yeah, it's about vows. Yeah, it's about people. There are people that have kept vowed moralities, or vowed to morality, I should say. The fourth one is that you didn't commit the 5 heinous crimes, which means that you didn't kill your mother, your father, an arhat. You didn't kill the Buddha, or you didn't split up the Buddha Sangha, which the last 2 you couldn't do in this lifetime, or even your last. But those are the 5 heinous crimes that you didn't do to be born a human.
You didn't do them ever?
I don't think that it's that you haven't done them ever.
What was the last one you mentioned?
A Buddha Sangha,
Yeah.
that you didn't split up the Buddha Sangha. So you didn't split up the Buddhas. Basically, they're mostly monks, but they're more or less like the disciples of the Buddha. Mm-hmm. I don't know the answer to your question, but I will find out. That's a good question. No, I mean, I don't think that you. I don't know.
You already paid for it?
You might have already paid for it. I mean, there has to be a clearance of your karmas to be able to clear those 5 crimes, if you had done any of them, to be able to born a human. So somewhere that's burned out or cleared up. It can't be possible that you did in your life. From what they're saying and what I'm deducing is that you can't have killed your mother, for instance, in your last lifetime and had the karma to be born a human.
But some humans get killed by their mom, by their son, whatever.
Yes, that's true. like in our current lifetime.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, total, of course. I mean,
So
not of
they
course, but it does
somehow
happen.
were born a human, even though they didn't commit this, but they still receive the karma. So,
Yes, sure. Yeah.
so
But that's that karma. You mean a mother who you mean a mother who dies at the hand, like from because their son or their child killed them in their lifetime.
yeah.
Yeah, but that's their karma for this lifetime to move on to their next. Does that make sense?
So they'll be reborn a human again.
No, they probably the person who killed their mother will not most likely be reborn
Not
again.
the mother.
The mother could be reborn as a human again or something else.
I guess I'm wondering how does a woman who had these fortunes to be born a human, she had this number 4, didn't commit any of these crimes,
Uh-huh.
but then be killed by.
She's not doing the killing though. This is that you didn't commit those crimes.
In this life. Sorry, I'm confused.
It means that, right. So the 10 fortunes that you have is that you didn't commit these 5 heinous crimes in your past lives. I don't know how far it goes back though. Does that make sense?
How does it work with animals? Like if you were an animal in the past life?
Yeah, it sucks.
If they
No, really.
based off of survival.
Totally. Yeah, yeah. It's, I mean, being in the animal realm is a really difficult place to be because you can collect the causes to be born a human, but it is difficult because you have instincts and there's just survival. And there are times where animals will kill their mothers and fathers, right? Because it's based on survival, or they'll kill their siblings. Like that happens all the time, right?
But there are animals that are carnivorous.
Yeah, sure.
That aren't, right? So
Yeah.
those that don't.
Yeah, and there are also animals that only live for a few hours or a few days, or insects, and and then there's, I mean, you go down. There's so many different levels of it, but you can create the causes to be reborn in a higher rebirth of being an animal. It's just, like if you were what am I thinking right now? A locust, it's a that's a tough challenge there. Like, how do you create the virtue, and how do you, I mean, and all of us have been insects at some point in our lives, but you end up being, I mean, the example that my teacher gave for this one was, like you end up being a lapdog for the Dalai Lama and you bring him a lot of joy. And that was your karma to have that. And that can give you the karma for a higher rebirth, giving animals the opportunity to be able to have and collect virtue is also another way to behave when you have animals. But it is difficult because there's instinct that they have, right? That they can't overcome with wisdom. So the ability that humans have that ability, right? The fact that you have that ability as humans to have overcome your instincts with wisdom, is a really big deal. It's not to be taken lightly, And so when you see people who do create heinous crimes or who are like, one thing that we think about, or not think about, but one thing that happens in our world all the time is like people do like the things that they do and the ethics that they go into because of sex. It's like, why? You have the ability with the human mind to overcome certain types of wrongdoings, or stabbing people in the back, or killing somebody. Like, it wasn't like a month ago where some guy, actually he did do this, he went out and he killed his boss on the Upper West Side. Did you guys hear about that? It was crazy. It was his boss or his coworker. He went outside and he just was so upset. He just killed his boss. I was like, who does that? It was like on the Upper West Side. It happened. It was just so crazy. We have the ability to overcome that. And yet a lot of us, and not that you're going to go out and do anything like that, but there are subtle ways, it's harsh speech and being malicious and even thoughts that come up, when you get so frustrated and you're like, God, I just want to kill him. Like, don't, just stop. You don't want to. You really don't want to. Don't plant that seed, Okay. But the heinous crime, Noga, to answer your question is, from my understanding, is that at the very least in your past life, you didn't commit those 5 crimes in order to be able to be where you're at today. But I will look into that again. Number 5 and 6 come out at the same time. Oh. Number 5 is to have faith in the teachings, that you have the ability where you can have faith in the teachings, right? Number 6 is you live in a world where the Buddha did come. Okay. Number 7 is you live in a world where the Buddha taught. Number 8 is you live in a world where the Buddha has taught, where the Buddha taught. You living in a world where what the Buddha has taught has not been lost from hearts and minds. There's a "the" missing. Or what the Buddha taught has not been lost from hearts and minds. That's a really big deal too. I think that the statistics is something like 99% of everything the Buddha taught has vanished from the planet. And so the very little that we have left that we were able to keep and survive, that was able to survive is what we have to go with. And it's probably the minimum that we have, the Lam Rim. It's the minimum that we have to understand the steps to enlightenment. Number 9 is living in the world where what the Buddha has taught is being practiced. And 10 is living in a world where there is support of practitioners. Okay. Any questions? We'll take a quick break. We'll take a quick 5-minute break and then just get back and we're going to go into scopes. Thanks. there are certain karmas that we all have. Like we have a collective like tonight. Like you all share the same karma of being in this room and experiencing this moment together. How you experience it may be vastly different, obviously, but you all have a certain type of karma that has bubbled up at the same time. And because there's a shared experience together, you're able to tap. It's more like you're part of that stream rather than like you've all in your past like decided to put karma points into a piggy bank and they were like, let's cash it out and go to this class together. It's not like that. It's more about, I don't know, it's more complicated. It's yeah, it's shared because individually all of you have certain karmas that are happening and they ripen. Karma seeds ripen at different paces, and you've all just been in a situation where you have the same type of ripening that's happening exactly at the same time, and therefore it becomes a shared karma. But we can go more into it in class 5 or course 5. Yeah, stick around for that. It's a good course. It's like the course that everyone always asks about. They're like, I have a, and I'm like, course 5, and they're like, oh. We go into a little bit tonight. Okay, so basically the first part of it, I know the list can get really boring to watch and also teach. But really the net is, guys, is that, and without getting too preachy, but really it's to just like take a moment and have perspective and understand that your life isn't really that bad. It may feel really bad in moments. And when you have those really bad moments, which we all do because we're human, you can take a look at the 10 leisures and see if that helps. And understand that there's so much to actually have gratitude for. Okay. And the importance, I think, if anything, those 2 lists are really about getting a sense of understanding the urgency of why it's important to have a meaningful life or you're just wasting it. Like it's taken, whether you believe it or not, but the idea is that you've worked so hard in your past lives to get to this point, and to waste it on just stuff, or things, or trying to make yourself exist in a certain way where you can be acknowledged is just not really the point. You're just wasting it. It's not really meaningful. So the beginning part of it really in the scriptures too, it's Tsongkhapa saying, just take a look at how rare your life is and don't take it for granted. Do something with it, for crying out loud, make it meaningful. And the way that he's going to take a look at it is, if you're going to make it meaningful, why not shoot for the top? Why shoot for just okay or whatever you can get? It's really about, let's get you some realizations. Let's take you to somewhere where it's lasting impact, so that it will impact not just your life currently, but also your future lives, wherever that is for you. Okay. Does that make sense? Okay. So he gets the second part that he'll talk about, that we're going to go through, is okay, I get it, right? Like, all right, teacher, you're urging me to understand how important it is to take advantage of this life. I'm hearing it. I heard your 10 leisures and the 8 things that would have been the worst situations I don't live in. Great. Now what? Now it's going into, how do I do it? Now how do I make my life meaningful? What does that look like? Okay. So we're going to go through the first part of it tonight. Can you say Ningpo? Lenpa? Sul. Again, Ningpo? Lenpa? Sul. So this is how to take essence, right? So it's how to take the essence of this life, how to make this life meaningful. I'm waiting. And just as we do in the Galupa Buddhist tradition, more lists. 3 ways to get out, 3 ways not to get out, 3 ways to get the most out of your life. Okay. So what he says is there are 3 approaches. There are steps shared with those of lesser capacity. There are steps shared with those of medium capacity. And there are steps for those of great capacity. He's basically saying, depending on what your capacity is, it's going to vary for you. It's not a cookie cutter situation. It's not going to be the same. Some of you will be coming from a place of lesser capacity. Great, not a bad place to start. Let's start there. Some of you will say, I like to go with a medium capacity. So then you'll start there. And some of you will say, you know what? I'm going for the highest capacity. So based on your level, he's going to be able to start telling us what he's doing is sharing with us. How do you have a life that's meaningful? Okay. And the first thing we're going to go with tonight is talk about the lesser capacity. Does this make sense? It's a pretty clear approach. I mean, this is, if you really think about this, it's remarkable because these texts are so old and yet they're still relevant. And it just, I don't know, makes me realize how much we have not really evolved as human beings. It's like, how is that possible? That he's talking about material things and wanting yourself to be acknowledged and these old ancient texts. Okay, here we go. Steps shared with those of lesser capacity. So the 2 steps that he has is consider a death meditation and consider the principles of karma. Okay. Those are the 2 basic ways to start. How do I want my life to be meaningful? 2 ways. Consider death meditation and consider the principles of karma. Those 2 are a great place to start. Lesser, by the way, doesn't mean that you're any lesser than anyone else. It's just where you're starting in your capacity. Okay? So we're going to talk about death meditations just for a little bit. There are 3 principles to a death meditation. The first one is understanding that death is certain. So when you do a death meditation, it's not to sit there and start freaking out that you're going to die. Okay, it's not like that. It's waking up in the morning, sitting on the cushion and thinking, today might be my last day that I'm going to live. And understanding that and considering, if today is going to be my last day, how would I live today? What are the things I must do today before I die? Does that make sense? That's it. Can you imagine? That's a wonderful practice. Today is the last day I'm going to live. What are the things I must do tonight or by the end of tonight, by the end of the day before I die? And you do that every day. I mean, that really should be something that all of you should be considering all the time. Really. Okay. So the first principle is you have to realize and understand that death is certain. Which is something interesting in the West because we don't really talk about death very much. And I often comment how interesting it is when somebody dies, in a family, and how people get so surprised by it. Like it's such a new thing. And we all know that we're going to die, but when it hits the gravity of it, because we don't really spend time thinking about the fact that we're going to die. And when it hits, it just feels so, people will say things like it feels unreal, but it's actually the most realist thing that we all have. We know that death is certain. We don't know what's going to happen in our life, right? We don't know if we'll ever have the job that we want, if we'll get married with kids and have the home we want and live and retire comfortably, and then the image of what we think that's going to, we don't know that. But what we do know is that we're going to die, right? So it's really knowing and realizing, understanding that death is absolutely certain. It will happen. The second one is understanding that there is no certainty of knowing when you'll die. Okay? Right? And the third part is when you die, the only thing that will help you is your dharma. So another way to look at that too is when you die during your time of death, the thing that will really only help you is really your spiritual practice, whatever that is for you. There's nothing outside that's going to help you, right? There's no medicine or treatment or anything that will necessarily relieve you of your pain, right? Or well, I wouldn't say pain, but that will stop you from dying. So as you pass through and you do your during your dying process, the thing that you really have is your mind, you know. And that's one also reason why sometimes I'll talk about meditation and we'll talk about opening your eyes during meditation. It's so, and also why um, I've been taught by my teacher to learn to practice meditating lying down, because when you die, you're probably not going to be able to sit up like this, assuming that you live a healthy, long life and you're dying naturally, or, you know, you're most likely not going to be able to sit up while you pass. So there is this idea of planting the seed and practicing meditating lying down so that you know how to practice that way so that when it happens, it's not a shocking thing for you. Okay? All right. In the reading, they do go more into detail, I'll just note, about the death meditation and end of life. So if you're interested, I would consider reading it. Okay. But that's really what the death meditations are. Okay. It's sitting down, understanding, and knowing that you're going to die. You don't know when. And if that's the case, under knowing that when it happens, whenever that is that there won't be anything that will be able to save you at that time, right? It is inevitable, and it is going to be your spiritual practice that can save you during that process and help you. Okay. The second part is the principles of karma. So really basic, again, we'll go through it, is that actions are certain to produce consequences that resemble them in content, meaning good produces good and bad produces bad, right? You can't plant a persimmon seed into the ground and get lemons, right? So you're going to produce when you act, or let's put it this way, when good things happen to you, they're happening because you have done good in the past. When bad things happen to you, they're happening because you've done some sort of bad deed in the past, right? But something similar. It doesn't need to be the same thing. Like we were just talking, Noga, about if you were to be in a situation where this is like such a gory, but you're in a situation where your son killed you, right? It doesn't mean that you necessarily killed your son in the past life. It could mean that you killed somebody else. Okay? And another being too, right? Okay. The second one, karma expands. So we've talked about this a bit, right? Where it's just like a seed. Karmas are considered like karmic seeds. So it's like a seed can be planted and it grows. It's 10, 15 times, 20 times to 100 times bigger than what it originally was, right? So same thing with karma. Karma expands. So the things that you experience now that might feel like a big blow in your life, and you wonder, how is it possible that I've never, like, you know, it's like, I once had this situation where I walked outside and I was, it was my boyfriend's car. It wasn't even my car, but I parked his car on the side of the road, and it was a totally normal, highly trafficked spot. And I walked out the next day, and somebody literally just rammed his car on the side up onto the sidewalk, and it was a massive car. And I'm thinking, I know I've never done that. I know I've never hit someone's car and did a hit and run. That is like who would ever do something like that? But that's a karma that expanded. It doesn't mean that I did that. It might have meant that I could have shoved somebody slightly or pushed somebody, you know? It could, like, even as a kid, like I'm playing toys and I just pushed somebody out of the way, or I hit something and was careless about it and didn't even care because it wasn't my property, you know? Where I just dump something, or it's just being disrespectful about someone else's property. You know, I could have done something like that, but did it with a very specific intention. And it's the intention, it's the intensity of the intention that grows your karmic seed. Okay, so it's the difference of I'm sleeping in the middle of the night and I feel something on my body and it's a mosquito, and I'm sleeping and it's just I kill a mosquito accidentally because I didn't know, versus like going after a mosquito with vengeance. Like I'm going to kill that thing. Those are two very different karmas. Same results, but it's the intensity that's different. Okay. So it's the same thing with good, right? There's a difference of giving money to somebody just because and not really caring about it versus having a very specific intention of wanting to help, right? So it's the same thing with good and bad karmas, just something to consider. The third one is there are consequences that can only occur from action, meaning that causes can only happen, or no, you must create the causes in order for karmas to ripen. They can't just come out of nowhere, right? Does that make sense? So every action that you've, or any experience that you have, those were causes that you planted in your life. If there are things that are not happening in your life, it also means that you've never created the causes for them. So if that's the case, it makes you can start to look and do an analysis and think, well, if I want X, Y, and Z, and that hasn't been happening to me, how do I create the causes for my future? Does that make sense? Because you can do that. Yeah? Questions about that? And the fourth one, the last one, is once you created the karmas, they don't go away. They have to ripen. Yeah. Well, you can actually reduce the powers of karmas too, but we'll go into that in course 5. There are ways that you can mitigate the powers of karmas to ripen. So if you have those moments where, you know, you get so angry at someone, you're like, God, I could just kill him or I can just kill her. You could actually mitigate that and lessen the karma of that mind. So the other thing with karmas too is that they're not necessarily just actions, it's also thoughts, because it's the movement of the mind, right? Whenever you have thoughts, that's what a karma is. It's not necessarily an action, right? So that's another thing to think about as well. Why it's so important to purify the mind. It's like, it's one thing of just, it's doing, right? But if you're mulling over something or obsessing over something or thinking good or bad over something, right? That's why we talk about dedication so much and rejoicing, because that's what will also create positive karmas for you, right? But it's the mind that is what creates the karma seeds. Because you could take actions that are just thoughtless. They don't have the same type of charge than taking an action with intention. So it's the intention of what you do, okay, that you should take a look at. Any other questions? Yes.
Number 3 talks about the consequences from the action.
Mm-hmm.
So is that like planting good seeds so that eventually you get to these things?
Yeah, yeah, sure. I mean, it's interesting because you could actually start playing with this concept and seeing how that starts to shift the way you live your life. You know?
Kind of manifestation.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, the thing is that you could, I mean, I'm going to tread cautiously on this because karmas ripen at different paces. But you can absolutely, when you're really practicing, you're not practicing for your current state, you're practicing for your future state. You know, and you're thinking in that mindset. It's not to relieve your suffering now. It's not really, you can't do it now. At this point, what you're experiencing now, you're having a bad moment. You can't change that bad moment. Have you ever tried to change a bad moment when it's happening? Have you? You have. And how has that gone? It doesn't really work, or that moment where you get pissed and it's flaring and you're like, I don't want to be angry, I'm going to change. You can't change it. That karma is done. And it's because there's something that you've planted in your past that's ripening. You can't change when something happens in that moment. It's like you're in a car accident and it's happening slow mo and you can't change that. That's going to happen. It's inevitable. What you can change is how you react, right? And what you're going to plant for your future. So when someone screams at you and it feels like they're screaming at you, right? In that moment, you have a choice. You understand what you would do is you understand, okay, first of all, you're not coming at me, you're coming from me. I'm projecting you as screaming. That's a little tricky when the moments of screaming, I'll be honest, because you're just like, it really looks like you're real. Like I feel like I can punch you, but it's, And the second thing though is I have a choice at this moment. I understand this is a karma that's ripening. I've clearly at some point in my life screamed at somebody, and therefore I have someone else screaming in front of me now. Okay? You accept that. You accept that responsibility. I accept that that is in fact true. Do I like it? No. Do I want this person to stop? Totally. But my choice now is I either scream back, which means what?
More bad karma.
I'm going to create more seeds of people screaming at me again. Or my other options is to not react at all and to have compassion and understand, which will give me my future karma at that point that I've planted is more good and more patience and acceptance and all the other things that you would want. So those are your two choices. So life starts to change when you start to think this way. It's not about what you are doing so much as how you're reacting to things. It's how you're thinking. It's what your intention is moment to moment, so that you're planning it for your future self, not for your current self, because your current self is unfortunately, and fortunately maybe, but your current self is experiencing karmas that you've already done in the past. They're just ripening up until this moment. The only thing you have control of now is how you're going to plant for your future. So it shifts the way that you look at things, I think. I mean, it does for me drastically. Like Armando and I had a situation I think it was like 2 weeks ago, like Friday, Saturday night. And we had a friend's birthday party we had to go to, I have to go to, but we were invited to. And we were so tired. It was just exhausting. It was a long weekend. We were so tired. And we're just like sitting there and I'm coming up with excuses like why I can't go and it's okay and they're not going to even notice and blah, 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 blah. And we're talking and the conversation, it was actually amazing and wonderful because the conversation wasn't about should we go, should we not go, and the excuses that we can have to justify why we go or don't go. But the conversation was really about, do we want people to show up for us in our future? Like if I'm having a party or an event or something that's important to me, celebrating me, do I want people to show up for me? And we both looked at each other like, of course we do. And so with that in mind, we go. We don't go because we're thinking, oh, we need to go to show our face and and so that she knows and doesn't get upset at us. And because whether we go or we don't go, and whether she gets upset at us or don't get upset at us, that karma is already in play. Does that make sense? Whether I can go and she can be happy, and I can not go and she could still be happy, or I can go and she can be upset and not go and she could still be upset. Whether I go or don't go has nothing to do with how she's going to behave. But what it has to do is what my future karma seed is going to be. How do I want people to show up for me? And so we went with that in mind. That's how karma works. And that's how you think about it. That's karma and emptiness playing at the same time, right? Realizing that it's not her, she's not going to be coming at me and telling me it's going to be this or that way. And so when I go and I see her, when we went to go to this party and I saw my girlfriend, it wasn't a moment of I don't look at her and think, oh, she should be happy or grateful that I'm here, because that's also my projection that I'm putting onto her, whatever that may be, based on my own karma of how I see her, right? So you're playing with all these different combinations. And so when you start to think about the laws of karma, when you start to think about the fact that this might be the last day that you will have on this earth, in this body, you know, you start to reconsider how you behave every day, moment to moment. You know, you don't cut people off. You don't be impatient. You don't get all melodramatic about how your life is so terrible. You know, you don't think that what you have to do is all that important in comparison. It shifts the way you think. It has to. It couldn't change otherwise, you know? So that's what these two principles are really about, you know, in this scope. And that's what Tsongkhapa is saying. For the lesser scope, these two things, and these two things are really hard. Most practitioners struggle with these two concepts every day, moment to moment, you know? But that's something that you should be considering if you're interested, according to Tsongkhapa. You want your life to be meaningful? These are the two ways that you can consider how to make it meaningful. You know, realize that you should be grateful of the life that you have, of the situation and conditions you're in. You know, and so you do these types of analysis and meditations. And that's what we talked about, I think it was last class or 2 classes ago, of the different kinds of meditations that you can have. You know, you basically do your review. You review and you look at, okay, do these 8 things and these 10 things, do they make sense? Is that, and you review it and you go through that and you do an analysis, and then you can do a single pointed meditation of, is that in fact true? How is that true? And you go into it. You can look at that again, and then it starts to feed into, well, if indeed it's true, then how do I start to look at meditations where I can do and think about death or karma? And you can do the whole analysis. You can go through the 3 different principles of death. You can do the 4 different principles of karma, and you review it and you get it. And then you do an analysis. You know, is it true that I'm going to die? Is it really true that I'm going to die? Yeah, okay, I can do an analysis on that, right? Is it true that, what's the second one?
Uncertainty.
That I don't know when I'm going to die? Do I really understand that? I mean, do I really get that? Right? And then what's the last one?
Only the Dharma can help.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And is it true that when I'm dying, in the moment of death, that only my spiritual practice is the thing that will help me? Or whatever's in my mind stream is the only thing that will help me? Or my heart? Just say mind or heart. It's the same thing. Right? So if that's true, then you can go right into a single pointed focus on it. And you can focus on that. And you can start thinking about, what does that mean? Right? And you can do the same thing with karma. So that's how you use those 3 different types of meditations that we talked about. But that's really the gist of it for this scope. Each scope that we'll talk about. So next week we'll talk about the middle and the higher scope. But this is where we start with the lesser scope. Any questions? Kind of a downer, right? It's a kind of a downer.
Is the vision fortune, is that a medium scope?
Mm.
Because we kind of talked about the 10 fortunes, and I was thinking, oh, if we wanted to meditate on vision fortune,
You can.
review the,
You can review all of those,
so
but they're
that's-
not necessary. No, they're not medium scope. They're just basically 2 different. So what Tsongkhapa is saying is that there's 2 different things. He starts with saying you should have the urgency for it, and if you don't have the urgency, you can meditate on the 10 leisures and fortunes of why you should have an urgency. Does that make sense?
So that's like pre.
It's a yeah. I mean, it's just one of the. They're not.
Because I know they're like they're all like part of the 21
Mm-hmm.
meditation.
Yeah, but it's.
So I guess there's like different,
Yeah, there's different ways to cut into it. I mean, the 8 leisures and fortunes can be a meditation on its own. It's not necessarily a part of the different steps of the meditations. Does that make sense? You can do a whole review on the leisures and fortunes first, because you have to understand the urgency before you can even get to the second part of how to do it. If you don't take, if you're taking your life for granted, right? If you're not realizing that you have these leisures and fortunes, then you're not going to have the urgency, right? So the first part is really about, this is why it's urgent. It could be so much worse. You could be in a situation where you don't have the freedom to do what you want to do, or to be able to have a spiritual practice. You can be in a place where you don't even know how to have a spiritual practice. You can be in a situation where you're not even born as a human, you know? So you go through those to even get a sense of urgency and see if that's true. And then from there, you can move on and start thinking about your death meditations and then the 4 karmas. Does that make sense? Because if you don't have that, you're not going to get on the cushion. There's no sense. It's going to be like, oh, I guess today I'll think about death. But there's no sense of why you need to do it today, why it's important now. I mean, it's really, you know, I say this, guys, because it's something that it's interesting, because even teaching it, it's so humbling and a reminder for even myself, because, you know, it's like, it's so easy to get caught up in the things that we have in life, right? The things that we want in life. And like, I recently met with a friend of mine who just got married, and he's talking about, like, you know, we just got married and we're doing this and we just bought a brownstone, and and I saw my mind go into like envy, like, what, I want that, why don't I have, you know? And I just stopped and I'm thinking, what just happened there for a hot second? And I can feel it rising. It's just a natural way of wanting to be, right? Or like, you see people that are your colleagues that are doing better than where you think you're at, or you feel like you should be better place in your life, whatever that looks like. Usually it's things that you have, or physically how you look, or, you know, do I have enough money saved? Why don't I have this and that? And why can't I travel all over the world? I mean, there's all these different things that we have that we envy. And the fact is at the end of the day, it doesn't matter at all. And I mean that truly. And to be able to have that as a practice where you're not judgment, there's no judgment or criticism to it. And it's not to say that you don't want to have it. You can have those things. It's not saying you should all become nuns and monks. That's not by no means the path for everybody. But it's just a simple understanding that it, you don't need to grasp at it. Like, I know practitioners who have had amazing and astounding practice, and they come out of 3-year retreat and they've had an immense practice and they've worked so hard on their practice, and they had no retirement plan, and now it just karma ripens and they have retirement plans and they have homes and cars. And last time I heard, one of my teachers, like, he just bought an amazing house and is driving an amazing car, and he doesn't care. It doesn't mean anything to him. He had no grasping towards that at all whatsoever. It just happens, and that's just what it is. And whether he had a car or he had to take the bus, it really wouldn't make a difference for him. It's not really the point, you know? So how is it possible to live your life, right? And, or the question is it possible to live your life so where you don't grasp at these worldly things? You can appreciate it and you can enjoy it, but it doesn't do anything for you. And if you are to focus on living a life that's truly meaningful, and even just considering these 2 different principles that we talked about, of you only have one life and you understand how karma works, could you shift the way you think, and could you actually be happier and still be able to enjoy the things that you have around you? You know, like, because how many things do you need, or can you ever accumulate enough things in your life to make you happy ultimately? No, we all know that, right? Like, we all know that. That's silly. I don't know if we always think that way. It always feels like, if I just had a little bit more, right? Just a little bit more. It's not true though, because even when you have that, it's not enough. So this is what these teachings are about. It's, how do you really have a meaningful life? And what does that look like? Okay. Good. All right. Idam Guru Ratmandala Kamira Dayami Diri Kewoku Tsunami Shades Tsoshin Tsunami Shades Joe Dampakuni Drupasha. We're just going to end class with a rejoice and dedication. So please take a moment and rejoice and commend yourself for coming to class tonight. Celebrate this life that you have. Realizing all the goodness that really exists around you, all the potential that is right at your fingertips. That you have the ability to create the future that you want for yourself and all beings around you. Rejoice coming tonight, learning about a method of how to free yourself and have a life that is meaningful, truly meaningful. And take the effort that you have put in tonight to listen and learn. Dedicate that to one person you know. It could be a teacher, a friend, a family member. Dedicate your efforts. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Hope that was a okay class. It was a little